Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. This is a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're here tonight, or today actually, to do my Wednesday night favorites, which is a show that I put on every Wednesday night, in which I pick a list of some sort or another that I rank in some kind of way, or I talk about the albums in some kind of way. And I do this every Wednesday night, and it seems to be a popular show on this channel. And so I try to do something a little different all the time, so it's never boring. So this week, we're doing a 5-album ranking, or a 5-album discussion, if you prefer. I've picked a topic that I've thought about for a bit. I did do recently a 5-album ranking in which I chose 5 albums that I loved, but they've since not really stood the test of time. In this case, this one is called the 5 albums I loved that have remained favorites for me. So as many of you know, generally what happens with albums, especially the ones that have been around for a long time. In my case, a lot of these albums have been around 45 plus years, some of them as much as close to 50. And what happens, especially if they're ones that you really like, happens is they generally kind of fade after time. They're going to kind of get burned out a little bit because you've listened to them so much. But these are 5 albums that hasn't happened to. I still like them a lot. I still listen to them fairly regularly. Now, especially with the channel going and so many albums to listen to, now what that really means is if I get them in like 4 or 5 times a year, that's a lot. You know, when you think about how many albums you got to listen to, that's a lot of listening. So I've picked out 5 that I know have stood that period of time, and I still consider them to be remain as favorites for me. So I'm not these are not in any particular order. I decided not to put them in any particular order because I love them all the same. They're all, basically they're all pretty much, well, there's one album or a couple of them at the bottom that are not. So maybe we'll do it that way. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll rank them according to, at least to that way anyway. So we've got a couple that aren't quite what I would call masterpieces, but they are strong albums. So we're going to start with this one, Rainbow Rising. This is a fantastic album. Hasn't quite made it to a masterpiece for me. I'm not really sure why. Just doesn't quite reach that level of perfection yet, and yet it's been in my recommendations for that the last couple of years, so it might make it eventually. And it's got 6 tracks on it. I love the album cover. This is definitely the same guy who did Destroyer and Love Gun did this album as well. Excellent album. Ronnie James Dio's on here, so that automatically elevates it higher than most albums would be, just because his vocals are always spectacular, and this one may be among his best of all time. And you got Richie Blackmore on here, one of the great guitar players, especially of the early 70s. He's very dominant. This is one of his best albums as well. You've got Cozy Powell, legendary drummer. You've got I'm drawing a blank on the other guys, but it doesn't matter. We'll get into it. So you've got 6 tracks on this album, all of them excellent. When I first was listening to this album, back in the, I would say in the late 80s, or early 80s, that's when I first got it, probably around 80, 81. The album had already, at this point, was about 4 or 5 years old. The side that I listened to was the front side, or the A side, or the side 1 if you prefer. And it had 4 excellent tracks: Tarot Woman, Run with the Wolf, Starstruck, and Do You Close Your Eyes. The last track, not as crazy about as the first 3, but those 3, I listened to this constantly. It was going on my play, because I had this in vinyl, so it went on my turntable all the time. And then after a while, I started getting bored with those tracks, because that's what happens when you listen to something too much. And I thought, you know what? The other tracks, and this was in the time period where I wasn't as big on long tracks. I had a harder time with them. So I didn't flip it over for the longest time. And then I flipped it over and discovered that the two songs on the other side were better than the ones on the front side. That's generally how it works with me. I don't discover these things only by accident, you know. So then it has Stargazer and Light in the Black. Both absolutely killer tracks. I think Stargazer is probably one of the great epic hard rock or heavy metal tracks of all time. Ronnie James Dio is absolutely off the charts on this song. Maybe his best vocal performance. At least for Rainbow, it definitely is that. You know, maybe some of the Black Sabbath stuff I might like better, but just a killer album with 6 killer tracks. Great album cover, great musicianship on here. Just really solid album. Definitely, if you haven't listened to this or you're not into Rainbow, this would be the one I would suggest to get into. Just has so much killer stuff on it. So that's the first one on the list for today, Rainbow's Rising. Next up, because I was kind of denigrating to this band in the last video, a lot of people took exception to my disliking of their album. And that will happen with these fans, because I was one of them once too, and we used to take hits from people all the time. I decided to go with Kiss's Rock and Roll Over today. Just to show people that even though I don't particularly had a great love for that last album anymore, this one, completely different story. I love this album. Everything on here is fantastic. I've always kind of liked this this album quite a bit. It's a harder rocking album. To me, it's of those 3 second group of albums that Kiss put out, Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, and Love Gun. This one I think is the rockingest of them 3, hardest of the 3. The album cover's really good. Comes between those 2 album covers that we did for the Rainbow Rising. The guy who did Destroyer and Love Gun did those as well. He didn't do this one, but I really like this cover. It's very spacey. It's well put together. To me, this rocks, man. This is just a rocking album. I think Gene Simmons personally think that this is the best album that he did as far as his vocal tracks on it. I mean, he's got Calling Dr. Love is on here, Love 'Em and Leave 'Em, See You in Your Dreams, and yeah, I think those are the 3. Did he sing? No, he did not. Anyways, all the really strong tracks from him, bombastic as hell. He's at his ego inflated as all hell on this album. And you know what? To be honest, whether you like him personally or you don't like him personally, it doesn't really matter. But without his bombasticness in this band, would they have ever taken off? Because people weren't going to see a Cat, and they weren't going to see Ace Frehley's guitar solos, and they weren't going to see Paul Stanley's great vocals. They went to see what the hell this other guy was up to, spitting blood and breathing fire and jumping around the stage and having that weird looking hairdo and all that metal that he wore all the time. That's what brought people in. That's what brought me in. That he was my favorite guy right off the bat. Gradually, he's been replaced, and he's probably in 4th position now. But at that time, he brought the music of Kiss to me, and this album is a signature album of him, really strong. I think Paul's stuff on here is really good too. Making Love. You've got I Want You, which is a killer track to start the album off. Take Me, yeah, and Mr. Speed, of course. All great tracks by him. And then you also have Hard Luck Woman by Peter Criss. Peter Criss, maybe among the best vocals of, maybe the best vocalist of the band as far as rock stuff goes, and especially that bluesy feel and that kind of raspy kind of voice that he has. So good. This is not one of my favorite Peter Criss tracks, but how can you ignore this guy? He's just so good. You know, Ace doesn't sing on this album, but he did write some of the stuff on here too. So this might be Ace's weakest album as far as writing and singing and stuff like that goes, because he doesn't sing on the album. But those guitar solos on here are fantastic. So this is an album that's really stood up well with me over time. It's been as high as, of those original 6 studio albums, it's probably been as high as second on occasions. Right now, it's kind of neck and neck with Hotter Than Hell for my favorite of those original ones. This is an album I do go to on occasion, and will continue to go to. Yeah, has stayed strong over the years for me and remains a favorite. Next album up. This is my favorite by this band, but it's being challenged by quite a bit of their early discography now that I have a lot of them and I'm getting into them. But this is a fantastic album with so many good tracks on it. I love the heaviness of the album. I love the album cover. Talking about Judas Priest screaming for vengeance really stood up well for me. Maybe part of that reason, it might be the same with some of the other albums that you're going to hear from too, is that I just recently got this, like within the last couple of years. I had it on vinyl. I think I've had it on CD before and played it a lot when I had it both times, and then didn't have it for a while and then got it again and playing it a lot again. It's from 1982. Really strong album. Starts out with a Hellion and Electric Eye. Fantastic tune. Then you got Riding on the Wind, Bloodstone, and Take These Chains, and Pain and Pleasure. All like just killer tracks. Just hard, melodic. Rob Halford's voice, fantastic. Really good, great stuff here. Screaming for Vengeance, that speedy, screaming song. That was one of the first tracks that I really liked by this a lot. You got Another Thing Coming. A little bit too much play for me. Devil Child, great track. Fever's good too. So this is an album that has really remained very strong for me over the years. In fact, more so that it's kind of, at one time this was up there. At one time, this was a medium album for me, but a good album. But now I think this is among my very favorite metal albums. I love the cover as well, really great, and the whole yellow part to the album. I'm a big fan of that color when it comes to rock music. Anyways, I think Halford's killer, and both KK Downing and Glenn Tipton, fantastic on this album. Very strong guitar playing. This is one of their better ones. Maybe one of the last great albums by Judas Priest too, at least of that era. Anyway, so there we go. Judas Priest, Screaming for Vengeance. So next up, and these aren't, I'm not really ranking these, so don't get your curls in a knot over this. I just put them in this position because some of them are masterpieces, so they should maybe do a little bit more of a talk about them. This album was the first of this band that I ever listened to. I got it at the library. I listened to it. Some of you have heard this story already, but I had it for about 3 weeks on loan from the library. I listened to it a half dozen times, and it was during a period when Kiss was the only band I listened to, so it was difficult for me to get into it, but there was a couple tracks on here that absolutely were killer, and we're talking about Rush's Fly By Night. First of all, the thing that attracted me to this album is obvious. The cover of it is fantastic. It's one of the best covers on any album. Maybe my favorite Rush cover for sure. It's got the song Anthem and Best I Can, which were the two opening tracks on this, were really killer for me when I first heard this album, and I thought, hey, there's something more out there than just Kiss. This was the beginning for me, and Rush was one of those first bands that I started moving away from Kiss, from Rush, Styx, Queen, and Black Sabbath were the big four for me. There was other bands in there too, but this was one of the first saunterings outside of the realm of Kiss, and just such a good album. And by this time, when I first listened to it, which was, I think in the summer of 77, this album was already a couple of years old. So just a fantastic album. I love most of the stuff on here. It hasn't really faded with me either. The only song on here that's kind of faded with me over time is In the End, which was the last track. I think it's a little bit too melodic, too kind of sounds a little too much like the first album, which I don't dislike. I do like it, but it just didn't stand up as well as some of the others. This album has stood up very well. The blueness of the album I like. The color on it is really great. Now, probably Bytor and Anthem are still my favorites, but there was a period of time where Fly By Night and Making Memories were the two big tracks for me on this album. I listen to those all the time. They're two that I still sing quite a bit as well. Beneath, Between, Behind, I was always amazed at how Geddy Lee could get the lyrics from that, which are kind of really, it's a very busy song. It's kind of would fit in well with a Gabriel album, when it's so busy, you know, the lyrics so busily put together here. But he was able to wrap his high soprano vocals around that and really make it a good song, I think. Even Rivendell, which is most people's least favorite on here, might be mine too, I'm not sure, but I still like that song anyways. It's a little bit different. This album has got that kind of Lord of the Rings feel to it anyways, with Rivendell, Bytor and the Snow Dog, and Anthem all kind of being that kind of science fiction-y feel to them. Anyways, excellent album. Rush's Fly By Night. Definitely an album that has remained strong with me, even though I've had this album for 40, probably 40 plus. I got it in 1980, right after I think it was my second album after I got Permanent Wave. So it's probably, you're looking at about 43, 44 years I've had this album now. This particular CD I've had probably 30 years as well. I had the in album form at one time too. Excellent. I love it. I hope, and I actually feel like listening to it right now, but we'll wait until we've done the video first. And the last one is even though it's a masterpiece and has been around very long time, longer than most of the stuff we're doing, for me, it originated or became part of my discography back in 2006, when I had that kind of a brief, really kind of renaissance. I got a bunch of albums at once. This was one of those albums. So it's been around for me about 18 years, even though the album itself has been around much longer, like 45 plus years. And it's become my favorite by this group. And I just love everything about it. It's just the whole concept is good. The noises are good. This is actually a fairly heavy album. We're talking about Pink Floyd's Animals, my favorite, probably my favorite. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's my favorite Pink Floyd album. It's pretty heavy too, especially when you get on a nice guitar, stereo system where you can really crank it. That's a friggin' awesome album, man. Dogs, of course, is probably my favorite on this album. So good, so heavy, so telling a story. I love the album cover too, fantastic. Sheep is good as well. It's a little bit more, not quite as heavy as Dogs, but interesting guitar stuff going on here on this. And then you got Pigs 1 and 2 and Pigs, three different Pigs. All really strong track, really well put together concept album. He was basically taking the George Orwell narrative and putting it into a kind of an albums thing. Excellent album. It has remained I've had it, this particular copy I got in 2006, so I've now had it almost 18 years, and there's never been a period of time in that 18 years where I said, I don't feel like listening to that anymore. Hasn't happened yet. It remains strong, remains one of my favorite albums, and it made Masterpiece album a couple years ago as well. So excellent album, and there you have it. Those are my 5 albums that I loved, I still love. They remain strong with me, and I don't think I would I can't see a time when I won't love all 5 of these albums. So we got Pink Floyd's Animals, Rush's Fly By Night, Judas Priest Screaming for Vengeance, Kiss, Rock and Roll Over, and Rainbows Rising. It's kind of funny that they're all heavier albums too, you know. I tend to be a little bit more, what do they call it? I tend to be a little bit more pastoral in my music now, a little folkier, a little bit more quieter sounds to my music than I used to be. But, you know, the 5 ones that have remained strong with me are all fairly heavy albums, you know. Other than Pink Floyd's Animals, none of them are particularly, and in fact, none of them are really progressive at all. It's just kind of funny. That's how it just turned out. I could do another 5. I may do another 5 at some point, but for today, that was fun to do. I like those albums. I hope some of you like those albums as well. If you got any comments about any of the albums, put it in the comment section below. Please hit the like. It's much appreciated. Subscription is great for me as well. And if you want to be notified of this content, please hit the notification bell. So next week we will be back with another episode of Favorites. I'm lining up to do I was going to do a monthly series called the 28 Voices of Favorite Voices or Sweet Sounding Voices of Rock. That's what I was going to call it. But I decided rather than do a monthly series on it, because I'm kind of liking the fact that I'm not doing the series anymore and I'm having more time to work on the stuff I like to do. I think this is just going to be my top 25 favorite sweet sounding vocalists of rock. So that's probably what we're doing next week. I hope you'll come out and watch that, and take care, and we will see you later. Bye.